Today I will have an honor to interview Mr. Ovais Sarmadem, the Deputy Executive Secretary of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. Good afternoon, Mr. Sarmad, and thank you for accepting our invitation. It is a great pleasure.
Good afternoon, and it's a great pleasure for me to be with you for this session with the United Nations Association in Poland.
During this interview, I will ask you several questions that were prepared by the members of our association, mainly on climate change and the Sustainable Development Goals. Shall we move to the first one?
Please do, yes.
Okay. The first question is inspired by the current situation we are all facing nowadays. Mainly, what can life in lockdown teach us in terms of fighting global warming effectively?
Well, first of all, what I'd like to convey to everyone who's listening that I hope everyone is staying safe and healthy and keeping away from this crisis that is threatening all of us. And as we say, this pandemic which the world is facing does not respect any borders, does not respect any divisions or cultures or religious or countries, borders, and any of that. So we hope that everyone is taking care and we will get out of the situation safer and hopefully stronger, and we remain very, very optimistic about it. Okay, but having said that, now the crisis is really something which is unheard of, unprecedented in our recent memory. But what it teaches us is that if we do not come together and work in solidarity, in supporting each other at all levels, local, regional, global level, then we will not be able to address these global threats and challenges, which is similar to what we have been saying all along about climate emergency. And so it does show us that. And in this context also, what the world has done in the last few weeks since the outbreak of this crisis, we're seeing many very strong measures that have been taken by countries, by individuals in all parts of the world. And that's what gives us a lot of hope that as we come out of this crisis in addressing that bigger threat, which is the climate change crisis, which is looming out there, it hasn't gone away, that the world will also equally rise up to that threat and to that challenge. So there are many lessons that we can learn from how we are behaving, we are acting, we are reacting to this crisis, to the future as we build back better in coming out of this crisis.
Thank you very much for your answer. The next question is, what is the meaning and the role of Katowice climate package in fighting global warming and the climate change, and how does it release the full potential of the Paris Agreement?
Very good question, thank you. And that brings back very good memories of the COP24 in Katowice 2 years ago, where we were all there with the rest of the world, celebrating the successful outcome of that COP, which was extremely important in the life of Paris Agreement, in the effort of addressing climate change. So what the Katowice climate package produced was the rules, the guidelines on how to implement the Paris Agreement. So we had the Paris Agreement, but we did not have the tools, the guidelines, the implementation, standard operating procedures on how to operationalize it. And Katowice package, or the negotiations in Katowice, led all the parties and the countries towards a very strong and robust framework in which the Paris Agreement is to be implemented. And the central part of that is something that is referred to as nationally determined contributions. So the Katowice package provides very clear guidelines on how countries will need to establish their nationally determined contributions in which they make commitments of the actions that they will take and how they will report and how they will be compared and measured against the goals and targets of the Paris Agreement. So that is what Katowice did. And I personally feel sometimes that if we had not done that in Katowice, that would have blown a very negative impact to the validity of Paris Agreement. So that was extremely important. So now, but having said that, those nationally determined contributions of the countries as they are being submitted and the countries are making those commitments are not still in line with the goal of Paris Agreement of 1.5 maintaining the global warming to 1.5 degrees. Under the current trajectory, under the current commitments, which are not sufficient, we will be going beyond that 1.5 degrees, even double that by the end of the century. So that is not good. So what is the role of the UN Climate Change Secretariat and all countries jointly is to enhance that implementation of what the world agreed in Katowice, to really very strongly and in a very robust manner implement those decisions. So as we say, we have the agreement, which is Paris Agreement, and we have the tools on how to implement it. Now it's a question of making sure we do that, we implement it, and that's where we are at the moment.
Okay, thank you very much for the clarification. The next question is how to move from activism and theoretical declarations to real actions oriented at climate protection. Also, in this regard, how much of an obstacle are vested political interests?
Again, thank you for the good question. And let me take the last part of that question first, the obstacles that are vested in the political interests. Unfortunately, we live in a world where politics and the national interests of many countries are extremely important, and those come into play when addressing global issues. So the issue becomes national interest versus the global issues, global challenges, global opportunities also that the world tries to address. So right now what we are seeing, unfortunately, is moving away from multilateral approaches to addressing global issues to more nationalistic approaches, which is not very good. And there are some countries who are going in that direction, but majority of the world is not. The people of the world, in many parts of the world, they recognize that their futures, and especially the youth, that their futures depend on working together, working in harmony, working in solidarity, working globally. So that is where the problem, the vested interests and political challenges are. The solution to it is not easy. The solution to it is that the public needs to ensure that they rise up, they bring those issues forward so that the changes at the political level will happen. Now, moving to your first question, first part of the question is how do we move from theory, declarations to concrete climate actions and protection? First and foremost, what we need to do is to encourage everyone at all levels to use every possibility they have to convey in very strong terms that we need climate action at all levels, and that is very, very important, very necessary. And we must get across that message that business as usual is no longer acceptable. And again, I come back to the movement that has been started by the youth in many parts of the world, and that is catching on. So that is one thing that we need to convey. We need to get the message across. And second, what we need to do is to strengthen the architecture of the Paris Agreement mechanisms through the Katowice package that we talked about, because that provides a very good basis, a very good architecture on how to go about implementing those decisions and actions that will get us to the safe future as it concerns climate change reality. So we need to do that. And third is that we need to, this is also extremely important. When we talk about addressing climate change, sometimes it's referring to governments or politicians, but it's not just them. We need to bring in all the non-political stakeholders, which is businesses, civil society, individuals, you and me, people on the streets. Everybody have to be part of it. And we in the United Nations Climate Change refer to this phenomenon as inclusive multilateralism. So it's not just between governments and states, it's businesses, big multinational companies, small companies, individuals, civil society, everybody. Everybody has to make sure that they understand what the challenges are, which many of them do, and everybody takes action at their level. And so we have in the UN Climate Change Secretariat process very robust programs and initiatives to engage with those non-party stakeholders. For instance, the sports community, for instance, the fashion industry, for instance, the travel industry. So they are all coming together to establish the goals and targets on how they will meet climate targets to reduce global emissions, to clean up their supply chains, and to become more sustainable. So those are the things that we need to do. So from moving from theory, because what is written in the Paris Agreement and even in Katowice package, it's what's written on paper. We need to bring it out from paper into real action. And those are some of the examples that I mentioned.
Thank you very much. The next question is that the Sustainable Development Goals are very ambitious. And how do you think, will they be met by 2030 if the current progress continues? And if not, please elaborate on what needs to be changed and what are the major obstacles?
The Sustainable Development Goals, the 17 goals, as we know, that were adopted in 2015, those are that framework is probably the best framework that is available to the world, to the international community, to address many of the challenges that we all face at different levels, from eradicating poverty to health, to climate action, oceans, you name it. So if we did not have something like that, we would need to create something like that, a framework which cuts across all the existential issues of the society and in the world in which we live in, and to then make sure that we are implementing it. So those goals provide that fantastic sort of framework and opportunity for all of us to get together and do that. Now, whether progress is being made and how far are we in the implementation of it? There is a lot of progress that is being made, but not enough. Again, it comes back to the political commitment by some countries and others in our sectors in society. That remains a challenge, but all in all, that framework of SDGs remains a very, very important framework that we all need to work towards and make sure that is implemented. As of today, 5 years since the adoption of those goals, it is very difficult to measure how well we are doing. In my opinion, I think we are on a good trajectory, but the pace and the level of implementation is not as good as we would expect it to be. We still have another 10 years, and with the current crisis of the COVID-19 crisis, the climate change crisis that is showing impacts in many, many parts of the world, and as a result of that, there are many implications of this. We are seeing in sub-Saharan Africa and other parts of the world, hunger, malnutrition, land degradation, and impact to biodiversity, all of that. So that is very clear, and everybody is aware of that. So that gives us even greater desire, momentum, and obligation even to address those goals. So we in the United Nations, throughout the United Nations, not just the UN Climate Change Secretariat, but the entire United Nations, at the direction of our Secretary General and all the agencies, we are very much committed to the implementation of those goals. And we have very good measures in place. Many organizations, UNDP is in the forefront of that, and other organizations, UNICEF and other organizations who are doing fantastic work in the field. So we will continue to do that. And I would request through this message, that everyone who's listening to this, they make themselves aware of what those goals are and what progress that has been made, and which organizations are implementing it, and to support those organizations, not just in terms of finances, but getting involved, engaged, and being active in promoting the implementation of those goals.
So, referring to your answer, I would just ask the last question. What can each of us do to implement the SDGs in our day-to-day activities, or the most local level?
That's a fantastic question also, because sometimes I recognize that in the United Nations and in these big policy debates and dialogues, we tend to talk about broad policy issues and frameworks and SDGs. But when it comes down to day-to-day, I mean, if you were to go and talk to your friends outside or my kids, then we need to explain at a very simple, straightforward manner what it means. So there are some actions from my side I personally try to do is one thing we need to keep in mind is everything that we do in our day-to-day life, when we go out shopping, when we travel, when we go and sit in the car, when we are consuming meat, products, clothes, we need to be aware of what does that do to the environment, and how we can reduce the impact that those consumers do to the environment, the surroundings that we take it for granted. So we need to be aware of that. So that's the first thing we need to do. So we need to then take actions to travel more sustainably. Every time we go out of the house or office, we need to think, how can I travel in a more greener way without emitting carbon emissions? When we go shopping into the shopping center, what we buy, we need to think one more time. If I buy these things, what is that? Where is that coming from? And how can I be more responsible in consuming this? So these are small things, and then the way our houses are heated or air conditioned, we need to question, where is that energy coming from? And make choices, because right now where we live, for instance, there are energy companies who advertise where they are sourcing the energy from, and we have a choice which one to select. So we could do that. And finally, also to think about how we can support those countries who are at the far end of the climate impact, those vulnerable countries. So providing support to them, donating whatever we can, and also through our banking relationships. When we have any money to save, we need to check with our bank, where are they putting the savings? Are those investments going to fossil fuel industries? So those are simple actions on a day-to-day basis we need to be aware of and think about, and then join movements that highlight the attention of the impact or the climate change impact does to our societies, and raise our voices. I'm not talking about protesting or doing anything which is against the laws of the countries, but in a responsible way, because today with the use of internet and the social media, we can all do that in a very strong way. So I think that is another very important action that we can take through our own ways of communicating with our friends, with our families, with our kids, to encourage them to understand how to live, how to consume in a more sustainable way.
So summing up, there's a lot each of us can do to help the environment and to stop the...
Absolutely.
So thank you very much for this interesting conversation and important insights. And we as United Nations Association of Poland are trying to spread the message of SDGs and of fighting the climate change. So thank you one more time for accepting.
Thank you very much, Weronika, and it's a great pleasure to be with you and to have that discussion. All of those very, very good questions, and I hope everyone who is part of your association and those who will be getting this message, they will benefit from this discussion. And I wish you all the very best, and please do keep safe and stay healthy, and hope to see you when we are able to get out of this. All the very best.
Thank you very much. I also wish you all the best.